In the 90s, Apple made many strange decisions. One of which was to go and squander away resources developing some failed macOS replacement called Copland that never went anywhere. And while there were some developer builds released for specific Power Macs, such as the new bus ones, the problem is Copland failed hard. I mean, it had development issues, and it was doing so poorly that when Windows 95 came out, Apple desperately needed a replacement. So what did Apple do? Well, they ran and bought a company called Next, which just so happened to be run by one of Apple's founders, Steve Jobs, and the rest is history. Now, at the same time, they had another operating system, and it was sold alongside macOS, and it would only run on certain higher-end Macs, such as the Mac IIci. Now, the Mac IIci was a great Mac. It had an external floppy drive port, it had two ADB ports, it had 3 new bus ports. I mean, the Mac 2FX and the 2X had 6, but it also had 32-bit clean ROMs. It had a lot of features in it, and it had a 25 MHz 6830 processor. It also had something else, though, and that was the ability to run Apple's operating system, macOS, but it also had the ability to run another operating system Apple had at the same time, called A/UX, or AUX for short. Now, this was a Unix operating system from Apple that was originally made to meet US government contracts and their requirements, where what they wanted was a Unix operating system. They wanted a Unix operating system that could run on these. And they wanted it to be able to run on this hardware so they'd win contracts, even if nobody actually used it. So, it had several versions of it. The first versions were, they barely used the Mac features of the OS and hardware. But later on, they added a compatibility layer and made it pretty well for Mac OS programs. Now, as you can see, AUX boots a bit differently. First, it boots from a special Mac partition of a few megs that loads the operating system up. And then, once it loads the Mac OS, it then boots into AUX. It starts by checking the disks and that stuff, just like Unix does. And then it starts booting the rest of it. Now, this is like Mac OS X in many ways, and I'll show you some of them, including the sense that this operating system runs both Mac and Unix programs, and the fact that it runs X11 over Mac OS, and it also is capable of doing things such as running Mac OS programs with a compatibility layer, just like what Classic did on the older versions. What I have hooked up in here too is a Plextor external CD drive. Now, you're going to need one of these or an Apple CD drive to install AUX on, because it has to have 512 block transfers enabled. Because if you don't have them enabled, it won't boot Mac OS and AUX on it. Like, you can boot Mac OS on it, but it won't boot the Mac OS and then AUX to install it, because it'll complain about, either it'll complain or it'll run into strange cryptic error messages when it tries to actually install it about drive access. Anyhow, boot up takes some time on this machine because it's a slower 6830. Now, I'll talk about one of the main flaws of AUX now. This OS is picky about hardware. It only runs on, I'll make it simple, it only runs on Pro line Macs, but not all of them. It runs on all the Macintosh 2s, but the Mac 2 VX and VI, it'll run on the original Mac 2 if you put an MMU in it. It'll run on the SC30. It'll run on all the Quadras, except the AV models, and the ones that were based on LCs, such as the 630 and 605. It simply will not work on those machines, even if you put in a full 6840. Now, the thing is, Apple was selling lots of machines at this time that did not meet the requirements. They were selling PowerBooks. They did not meet them. They were selling Performas and LCs. They could not run AUX. So, Apple was selling all these machines at the same time that couldn't run AUX. And this was probably one of the reasons why Apple never ended up making this the main Mac OS, is because they didn't bother to support more hardware. But that's not the only thing Apple did. You see, Apple actually, this was also unsupported on the PowerBooks too, but what also happened with Apple was when they went to PowerPC, AUX would not run in the same way macOS would, where with macOS, instead of pouring it all over at once, they emulated lots of the 68,000 code. This would have required more effort to emulate. And due to this, what happened was, here it says Apple Workgroup Server 95. That's because this was originally being sold with Apple Workgroup servers. And the Apple Workgroup Server 95 was a Quadra 950, but with AUX. And it was designed for server use. The thing is, though, when Apple replaced it with Apple Network servers, I think that's what they were called, they were not macOS compatible, because they wanted to have Unix. So what they did was they made a tweaked version of AIX, which is what IBM machines ran, such as the RS6000 and P series. I mean, I've got one right here, actually. This can run AIX. It's a P5. It's got a little fold-out display, too. That could run AIX, and so could the Apple Network server. And the thing with the Apple Network server is that ran only 2 versions of AIX, and they were modified Apple versions. It could not run Mac OS. It could not run any other OS. Kinda sucks, doesn't it? So I don't know why it took so long to do the disk check there. So now it's booting the AUX kernel. So let's click Messages. And as you can see, if you click Messages, it'll actually pop up the console telling you what it's loading and what it's doing. Kind of like what AIX does. Kind of like what AIX does. So what it's doing here is it's firing up all the processes like a Unix system would. Except this isn't a Unix workstation or PC, it's a Mac with a 68,000. Let me tell you, you can get these cheaper than an HP or Sun 68,000 workstation. And especially an SGI 68,000 workstation. Oh god. You can't find those. So, as you can see, the login manager is Mac styled. You get the hide login thing. You've got keyboard layouts here. You can show balloon help. The power key does nothing. Absolutely nothing. And if you hit shut down, it wants you to pop in the root password first. So the first thing you'll notice about AUX, and that is, in typical old school Apple fashion, not only does it have an about box that goes into detail about what it does with Unix, with separate accounts being made and security, when you click it again, you get to see signatures of who made AUX. Pretty interesting, isn't it? So we're going to log in as root. And first we're going to log into the Mac desktop. Now there are several login options on AUX. And AUX also has a bunch of interesting features, so it's clearly owning some Mac stuff right now because you'll see a puzzle piece show up for QuickTime. See, puzzle piece. So it's clearly loading some extensions. So right now, AUX looks like any other old Mac from this era. Go to About This Mac. Mac IIci. However, something to note here is that not all the RAM is dedicated to macOS. So you'll see built-in memory and total memory being different. Control panels. You'll get a bunch of them here. You'll get startup disk, which is set to Mac partition. Sound, which lets you change all the usual sounds on a Mac. There's the mouse control panel, which lets you change that. And there's also colors, which lets you change that as usual. It's pretty much the same as an old Mac. So right now, looks the same as any other Mac. So what makes this different? Well, first let's go and open up Command Shell. And you'll see that this is not running under macOS. Second thing to note here is that the Mac partition is only a few files, and the AUX loader, and all the stuff is on this Unix formatted drive. So you've got folders for applications with stuff like a text editor, a Unix style one, and not just the usual teach text or whatever Macs came with. So you can see it's from Apple Computer, 1993. Apple HD SE setup, a document viewer for viewing documentation about AUX. And let's close this out. Documentation's here. Some admin guides and that stuff. And you see all the usual files and folders here, such as bin. It's a little slow to come up because there's a lot of files, but yeah. So on the Mac, you have two types of ways of opening up Unix programs. On one hand, you can go do something like, let's type in chmod. It's just going to tell me the usage. So let's try something else. Let's double click on chmod here. What happens is it fires up a program that gives you the it gives you a GUI, so that instead of having to look at the manual or try to interpret the syntax, you can do things such as check the user types, group, owner, group others, read, write, execute, and it'll change what's up here. So we're going to hit cancel. And now we're going to quit out here. So now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to, I'm going to quit out of here. And I'm going to open up MacX. So you probably know by now about x11.app on Macs. This is the same deal, except instead of being on Mac OS X, it's on AUX. So let's switch to command shell. Let's make a new window, and let's run XIs. Look at this. It's a bit slow. It's hard to move it, so I'm gonna have to change the window style and as you can see here, I've got XIs running on this Mac. Of course, as soon as you quit out of the X server, it quits following you. So I'm going to quit this, kill this window. So let's log out of here. There's a log out command under special. When you click that, it logs the system out. So let's try something else. Let's go to special, or I mean options, change session type. You get several options. First is console emulator. So what this does is it gives you the console. It doesn't give you any sort of plain text terminal. Problem is, of course, is there is a weird quirk with this, and that is, as you can see, it put me in a Mac-like window that's labeled AUX in the title bar to try to, you know, be with the Mac style. The problem here is that because it's using the video hardware, you can't like run startx or xinit or a command like that. You're just stuck with the command line. You can't do like what you can on other Unix or Linux systems where you can start X and it takes control of your screen. You just can't do that. So right now you just get, there's no mouse here, but you can type stuff in. Like, and as you can see, it's a lot faster in this mode with drawing to the screen. Let's log into the more interesting of the two session types. Let's go to special. Options. Now X11 makes the Mac run straight up X11. Now we're talking more of, this gives you more of a Unix box from the 90s look. It's got X, it's got the clock, it's got the user localhost, what's it called? The host name, yeah, it's got the host name over there. And so you've got the console. You can fire up apps. And it's got TWM here, so it's a bit more responsive running other straight X11 than and it's faster here too than when it's running, say, the compatibility layer and everything. So this is straight up Unix running on here right now. You can't run applications that make use of the Mac toolbox though, or AUX's regular desktop, because right now you've just got X11. But if you want to run apps you've recompiled from source, this will work. This will work just fine. It's also faster here too than it is under the other, it seems. It seems more responsive and everything. Let's switch here. Now here's something interesting. AUX maps the middle mouse button to the left arrow and the right mouse button to the right arrow, respectively, along with meta and control keys to the usual, and that's because Macs had one button mice. So this is what they did to make up for it. So let's log out and shut it down. You have to give it the root password, but once you do, it shuts down properly. Now, on Macs with the power switch, like the 2CI, you could probably jam it in there and it would turn it off instantly, but that also means that you'd have to do the whole disk check once it boots up. So, yeah. All in all, AUX is an interesting portrait of what could have been had Apple taken a different path and maybe had more sense back in the 90s too, because it seems like a lot of tech companies made some massive screw-ups in the 90s, all as Microsoft plowed their way to #1. And when Steve Jobs came back, one of the first things he did was market Macs as a line of computers for hip and trendy cool people, like the iMac and whatnot. And you know what? That's how he saved the company. Not through making products that were better, but by making products that were marketed less towards the professionals and more towards the Ellen Feises. And if you've seen that Mac commercial, you know exactly who I'm talking about.